You need the wand, my friend. Linden's going to talk to us about what they're doing at Solve. And it's a fascinating story. And it's probably giving away a little bit of the ticks for what you're doing with talks of P. But welcome, and the stage is yours.
Thanks very much. As an introduction from the film side, I've had the most time to think so far. Well, obviously, time continues to march on. But so my favorite film would be Cloud Atlas. I'm maybe a bit more of a niche one, but essentially lots of interacting storylines, lots of fun things to unpick whilst you're watching it, and then a nice sense of everything coming together at the end from loads of different directions. Feels like you've solved a puzzle along the way there. And the fun of watching lots of famous actors play 8 different roles across the film in different time periods, which is always fun to see how similar people can do very different things. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about better data leading to better decisions around chemical process development and scale up. So as a quick introduction to us as a company, we're only 2 years old now. I founded Solve out the back of my PhD, and we're now a team of 15 people, so grown a nice amount in that time. We're focusing on speeding up process development in pharmaceuticals, agrochemicals, and specialty chemicals, so around small organic molecule synthesis, how we get from that first milligram once it's been discovered to the kilograms needed for trials and the tons needed for production, depending on your industry. We have an automated lab that prints standardized data around how different process parameters affect the outcomes of chemical reactions. This is high quality, quantitative, fair data. We want this to be useful not just when it's originally produced, but useful for years to come and useful in AI applications, as I'll speak a bit more about later. We also have software that maximizes the value of this data to produce insights from this as well. It's not enough to just produce a pile of data and then expect someone to get the best insights out of it. We can do a bit more with this and actually provide the value from this as well. So, everyone here will be familiar with FAIR, findable, accessible, interpretable, reusable data. We think there are a few more things that if you're actually producing the data that you should care about if the purpose of what you're doing is building data sets that you want to be used later on for years to come. And we have a kind of mirror on the wall. Maybe I should have said Schreck as my favorite film. Maybe that would have been better. With my surname as well, that would have made more sense. So what do I mean by these? So extrapolable. It is good that the data isn't just data for data's sake. When you're in something like QC, data is primarily being used for this purpose of quality control, but if it can be used for other things, that's good as well. And having an eye for how this might further be used, not just for the original application it was being collected for. The second term I'll talk about is scalable. So making sure that if you're collecting data in one way to begin with, if you had a lot of demand for more of that data, as we often see in kind of AI-based applications for this as well, or if we expect big growth in an area of a business, that we can continue to collect more of it without that much change to the process. So designing processes that if the data is good to begin with, you can collect thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more data points when you need them. And then the last point would be transmissible. It's not just enough to collect data for your kind of area you're in. It's important to be able to communicate this to stakeholders and get the value out of this so it's actually usable for people that are maybe less data literate or have different levels of visibility over what's going on. And this is important so we can interact with stakeholders across organizations as well. So I'm going to give, this I think is applicable to a range of things, not just in chemical process development from people that are collecting data, but I'm going to talk about it from our process development kind of outlook. Initially with an example from some work we've been doing with AstraZeneca on some white paper work here. So in this case, we were looking at this reaction in the top right, which is being used in one of their drug substances. They had previously done this and it had taken them 6 weeks to collect the data they needed and to build the kinetic models for the scale-up pathway they were doing. We found that from taking the data into our lab, into our highly automated systems in our lab, that we could collect this data from the chemicals entering our lab in just 4 days and make sure that we could get the kinetic models out of this, the aim of this data in kind of minutes in this case instead of the kind of weeks that it was taken before. So to go back to some questions earlier on kind of pricing value, we see this as pricing value of shortening time periods of existing things. So trying to do drop-in replacements for what's already going on. This is an important thing if you want to get adoption of a product early on, but it's also important to have an eye for the future of how this will be used more scalably. So in terms of extrapolability, the importance of getting, not just treating data as a black box and not having context around it, is you want to be able to extrapolate it out from the system it was originally in and the context it was originally designed for, so speeding up this 6-week process to take 4 days instead, but also making sure the model is fit for purpose for the next steps. So when we're coming to manufacture later on, for example, if this drug were to be successful, you wouldn't just want it on gram quantities, you would be wanting to put it into pilot plants and then eventually into kind of full manufacturing plants. And we want the data that we're producing now to still be useful then, as opposed to people having to collect data again at every stage when you come to safety concerns and regulations later on. So making sure this is a physically interpretable model and that it fits into other people's software for that, those next steps is really important to think about early, not as something to think about later on in the process. It's also important to make this easily transmissible. So we've built a web app around our offering as well for sharing this data and sharing these insights in a nice, easy way. It's obviously very important to make this very secure, but you still need to make sure that people can access it when they need to across the organization at the level of detail they need. So this is important for feeding in and out of different electronic lab notebook providers, but also we've built links into things like Jump and offerings from Mettler Toledo and Siemens as well for how these things are scaled up. So that even though the data was collected in our platform and has the context there, if it needs to go to a different platform, we can keep as much context as we can with it, but we have a pragmatic approach of if people need to move data around, they should be able to move this data around nice and easily. Similarly with the models as well. We've also importantly built this API first, and I'd encourage anyone that's building any software tool to always build API first instead of trying to do a nice shiny front end right at the beginning, because most of the use in the future I think is going to broadly be through APIs. I've spoken to a few people today that are building, their companies are building different things for integrating different tools together, and there's lots of companies in this space now for integrating these different tools. Therefore, it's important that the software we build is communicable in this way. It's also therefore important that we can license this in different ways. If someone already has a good way to collect data and they think their data will work well in our software for the insights it generates still, great. We don't want to have to produce data for them if we don't need to. Making sure that our offering is subdividable for the different things that will be helpful for different people. So, the last one, I've done these in the wrong order, you may have noticed. It's hard to get EST to line up in the right way. So here we are at S now, on scalable. So we think someone could build a system in their lab to collect a lot of data, but you need to make sure that the supply chains for your equipment allow you to build 10 of these systems if you need this, especially when we're collecting data for AI applications as opposed to individual projects. We work in a scalable way with our business model as well, making sure that people can easily use our data collection abilities from our lab. So making sure that the initial work can be done for free, then we can move on to paid pilots for individual use cases, but generally across lots of operating divisions at the same time. And we're kind of for a unified kind of innovation center within organizations often, but making sure there is scale for if someone wanted to fire a different reaction at us every couple of days, that we could still handle that and could grow with the customer's need there. I think what's important about the kind of scalability aspect of this as well is when you have the ability to scale how much data you're collecting fast, it allows you to unlock different possibilities as well. Instead of thinking of individual projects, it allows you to use the downtime in a kind of AWS kind of style way, using the downtime of their kind of high power compute in order to collect data for other applications. So making sure you can fill in gaps in existing data sets that most big pharma and big agro companies have, and adding to those for kind of future AI applications to be built in-house as well. Something you don't necessarily, we've had a few talks today which kind of highlight the short-term, long-term trade-off of these things. And I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't necessarily need to be a trade-off. You can do both of these things at the same time if you have the flexibility and capacity in your systems. As a case study of doing this on scale, we work closely with BASF on the Ludwigshafen site primarily, where we're used across a range of different operating divisions to collect data for a range of different applications. So just showing that though data is the original source, this data can be reused by a range of different operating divisions and by different people within this across the scale-up value chain. So from the last talk from Abvi there as well, important that we can then look at how we collect this data down into the discovery phase as well as just in the development phase as well. If you make it very easy to collect data and insights and you know they'll be helpful later, it's a kind of no-brainer to collect data as early as possible to help see those risks before they become a risk. So a brief bit on the technology, but I won't dwell on this as this is mainly about data, but I think the highlight here is to say those are kind of core of this is how we collect data in a really efficient manner. It's not enough to just collect any old data. You want to be making sure you're collecting the right data. And this is where our kind of machine learning planning comes into this to make sure we're collecting the right data based on knowledge we already have. So we're not throwing away anything that already exists. And there's often a trade-off between using things that already exist versus using new things. And again, our approach is very pragmatic of use both. We can use both for these things instead. So then when we're performing the most effective experiments and collecting it in the most efficient manner, it's then to making sure we're getting best use out of this data with a range of different machine learning and AI capabilities here, and always making sure it comes back to the customer in this iterative loop so that things don't go in the wrong direction in this kind of autonomous loop. So just to kind of reiterate these points, we're collecting better decisions require better data. The better data you can get, the easier you can make decisions with minimal risk. It's also important that this data is repeatable. So something we've been very keen to do is every time we add a new system and we add a new person to the team, we perform the same chemistry again to make sure it's still doing exactly the same things and that we're collecting the same data. Again, very important when you're building AI applications not to have loads of noise in your data if you can avoid it. If you've built a whole AI application based on a load of systematic error and noise, it's not going to be very good at performing on different things. So we make sure it's always collecting the same data. Oh, nice to have it spinning. Our loop in general, as we've spoke about this morning a bit with AI, we think it's important to have the human making the decision at the end of the day. This is not so much of it's somewhat a technical point, but also a commercial point. There are lots of bits of data which don't necessarily make it through into different AI applications and into third-party providers as well. Therefore, it's much better, instead of thinking of kind of optimization, for example, externally, to think of ways that allow the customer to re-optimize as often as they can. So making sure that data is reusable and insights from customers can go into this loop to generate the best outcomes. Another important thing from kind of AI and data collection that we've found is if you start a kind of AI LLM loop off with just some words, it generally underperforms and hallucinates, and then you fix that often by collecting data based on that knowledge and training it back round. But what I would kind of stress to people is it's much better, if you can, to start with a data set in advance so it's pinned to reality and then go around this loop. So the importance of where you start in a loop is important for this aspect as well. We also do work around solvent understanding, broadly because what we care about is anything that is scale independent, so information that is still useful as we scale up. Solvent understanding, important at small scale when you're trying to make it easy to work with, but your solvent specifications for a process will change as you scale, as you're going into more regulated areas and into areas where you care more about the sustainability of the process. A ton of DMFs are much worse than a kind of milliliter of DMF, and we're making sure we work fast on those areas as well. and can provide this information in a way that's useful for both R&D chemists, but also engineers on plant level as well. That to say, we're a small team at the moment, but over a broad area. This means, as Nathan was saying earlier, we can move nice and fast on these different aspects. But the important thing I found was building this team is making sure we always have kind of Venn diagram overlap between different roles. So no one's ever thinking in pure isolation. They have someone they can talk to about what's going on, whether it's machine learning, software engineering, automation, or computational chemistry. And with that, thanks very much. I'm aware there's a coffee break coming up, so I won't take too much time.
Questions, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I have a question on the kinetic model generation. So is this still then done by experts, or do you use AI or so and automation for this part of understanding chemical reactions as well?
Yes, so this is AI-based. So this generates the mechanistic microkinetic models itself, generates a series of ordinary differential equations. Based on that, these are then fitted to the data, and it iterates around in about 40 training runs to find the best fitting models for that. This is driven by generally the simplest kind of prompts you can give it are just the structure of the two starting materials or however many starting materials you have and a product. But you can also add things like side product, solvent effects you expect. If you've identified something by a mass spec, but we haven't necessarily seen it, you can still go, I know this exists, so please put that in, and it will go around that loop. And you can reprompt that cycle as well.
So that gives you the speed up with respect to a classical approach.
Yes. So I guess that once the data is collected, the mechanistic microkinetic loop, if you're doing kind of 30 of these things, takes maybe about an hour to run through in the background, and then it gives you a list of the top 5 fitted ones. You can then design discrimination experiments between them and keep going round until you've got to the level of understanding you need.
Thank you.
Hi, very nice presentation. There are already a lot of well-established kinetic and molecular dynamics packages that can model solvent interactions, etc. Do you ever check your grassroots work against results that could come from a well-established package, or is this in a different direction than where you like to go?
So we build a lot of those into the back end of what we're doing anyway. So there's Cosmo RS is built into the back end of this. There's a load of MD and UMA kind of stuff going on. What we find with, so for example, with BASF working with their quantum chemistry teams, for example, they're obviously using a lot of those tools. What we find is our tool outperforms those old tools for these aspects, but if you use both together as well, you get a little boost on top of what we do as well, which is why we've built it into the back end of what we're doing. Broadly, those tools, what we find if someone's just using them is they are desperate for physical proof of the models they're seeing, and our data allows that physical proof as well. In terms of the other kinetics, we make sure we partner with people like Mettler Toledo and Siemens so that the kinetic models that we produce can go directly into their mass and heat transfer systems as well, and things like Aspen as well, obviously. We don't want to deal with the mass and heat transfer stuff. That's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's done great already. We want to solve everything else if we can. Yeah.
Thank you very much, yes.
Okay, no more. Thank you. Thanks, mate. Thank you. Okay. Glasses.